Classes are very important if you want to understand how object-oriented programming works. They allow you to create interactable objects in your code and let you group together your code to simplify and organize it better. For most classes at least, there will be the framework for any object you want to create. The key concept being that every time you create a new object, you are creating an instance of its class. Think of the class like the blueprints for your object. It decides what defines it and what it can do. Class declarations define what has access to your class, what the name of your class is, and what your class encompasses. Generally, we break classes up into two main parts. The class attributes are the data values that define your class, and the class methods are the functions that your class, more specifically that the objects of the class, can perform. Constructors are a special method which give you the ability to initialize your objects. Typically, this entails updating your object's attributes to their initial values. Notice how the constructor is the only method that has no return type. Say for example we want to create a car object in our code. Here's what a basic class might look like. This might seem daunting, but let's break it down, shall we? Here we have our class declaration. This class is public because we want other classes to be able to interact with it, and the name is car, pretty self-explanatory. Here we see the class attributes, or essentially the data that is going to make up these cars. Notice how the data is private. You typically want to do this to prevent outside classes from directly changing the data. For the sake of this video, I kept it relatively simple, but if you intended to represent a car in code, you would want to represent more than just the gallons of gas and the miles per gallon. Here is our class's constructor. Inside we have two parameters to represent the miles per gallon and the gas. Notice how we update the global attributes inside this method to the constructor arguments. Finally, we have the class methods, which allow us to interact with our virtual car. Mind you, this code is not perfect and technically has some bugs in it, but for the simplicity of understanding classes and not confusing the viewer, those are insignificant. Alright, so let's see how we would create objects and work with this class. Notice the new keyword on the first line. This tells the computer to allocate new memory for this object. We create a car object named Subaru and set it equal to a new car using the constructor we defined earlier. This Subaru has a gas mileage of 25.4 miles per gallon and starts with an empty tank of gas in this example. So let's get back to our code. The blue values show what's going on behind the scenes. The global variables are assigned these values from the parameter of the constructor. And now you see the variables at the top are updated. Back to the example, the next line takes our object and calls the method addGas. In the code we see 12.67 gallons being passed into the method. Then we see the gallons of gas variable get incremented by num gallons. This plus equal sign is just a fancy way of incrementing a variable by a certain amount. We see the expression get simplified, and then the gallons of gas gets updated at the top. Next line of our code in our example, we call the drive method on our Subaru car object. Jumping to our code, we see 11.8 miles is how many miles our car is going to drive. We then decrement our gallons of gas variable by a very specific ratio, num miles divided by miles per gallon, which, if you check the units, will find that it calculates how many gallons of gas are used to travel that distance. The computer performs the math in the same order as PEMDAS, and finally simplifies the equation. Now we see the global variable for gallons of gas at the top get updated to the value that was just calculated down below. And now we just calculated how many gallons of gas would be left in the car after all this code. The Subaru object would be left with 12.21 gallons of gas. And that's all you need to know to understand the very basics of classes. If you enjoyed it, feel free to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.